It never ends the amount of accusations against the DPRK. However, in the last couple years or so, those accusations have moved away from the completely ridiculous that you'd have to be an idiot to believe to things that are much more believable, but still also false. A human rights organization called Peace Corps, whose headquarters is in Seoul, says that the DPRK's children are constantly in danger of sexual abuse and the resulting social stigma without any chance to seek legal protections. In other words, they're claiming endemic sexual child abuse and that it's essentially sanctioned by the state. They claim it's institutionalized. Now, that's an important term they use here to keep in mind. Now, activists with Peace Corps, or the People for Successful Korean Unification, interviewed more than 200 male and female North Koreans who had fled to settle in as they describe, the affluent and democratic South. When you're deliberately using terms like that, rather than things that are more neutral and more to the fact, but the fact that you would go out of your way to say that the South is better than the North, what is supposed to be an unbiased survey, and essentially using the scientific method, it shows really, really who they are and what their goal is. For a study on child abuse at home and school and state facilities such as prison camps and orphanages. In the 195-page report, Inescapable Violence, Child Abuse Within North Korea. And you can usually tell when a paper or an organization refers to them as North Korea and not the DPRK. That's usually another good sign that they're not being honest. The group describes sexual abuse as institutionalized and widely accepted as a normal part of life. Children are constantly in danger of being sexually harassed and have no legal recourse available to them. The lack of government response crystallizes the notion that sexual abuse is tolerated and results in the rampant social stigmatization that prevents victims from reporting their abuse, Peace Corps says. Now, the problem with this is that's a pretty small sample size, only 200 people, and I'll bet there is sexual abuse in the DPRK. There's sexual abuse in every country. Sexual predators exist across the entire world. The DPRK would not be an exception in any way, shape, or form. But yet, from only interviewing 200 people, somehow that means there's an epidemic. Interesting how you could take such a small sample size and then claim that's the entire country. That would go completely against the scientific method. I would also like to point to Article 295 of the DPRK's legal code, which shows sexual intercourse with a minor is, well, it's illegal. And you can get, several years doing rehabilitative labor for doing so. Now, it's interesting that this law is here, yet the organization does not demonstrate how it's allegedly not being enforced. So this is a completely baseless accusation saying, okay, here's some people who claim to be sexually abused, which I'm sure they probably have. I'm not denying that. I'm denying the claim that it's a widespread epidemic and that it's institutionalized. When you say it's institutionalized, you're saying that there is a deliberate policy of this. But then they turn around and say, well, it's not an official policy, they just look the other way, which kind of contradicts the claim that it's institutionalized. Especially when the actual institutionalization is that it's a crime which can get you several years in prison. Now, they also acknowledge that the survey was too limited to provide a generalized sample, which is interesting because that's exactly what they display it as, a generalized sample, but then say it's too small to be a generalized sample. Which means they've just completely undermined their entire point? They've just undermined their own study? By saying that. You're saying, here's our study, but here's why our study is unreliable. It's kind of interesting how that works. And they even acknowledge that gathering information in North Korea is notoriously difficult. And Reuters, Thomson Reuters, the news company, was unable to independently verify the defectors' accounts. So not only is there essentially no reliable source for this information, it can't be confirmed by someone else, and they acknowledge that their own sample size is too small to be a generalized sample. It's really interesting how, by their own admission, it's pretty much complete nonsense. But if that's not enough, here's some more. Here are some of the actual organizations that partner with Peace Corps. It's not a conspiracy. They openly acknowledge this. The U.S. Department of State, the North Korea Freedom Coalition, the Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency for some reason, and Free North Korea Radio. In other words, what we have are several organizations that are, well, it's not ambiguous who the U.S. Department of State is and why they have consistently lied about the DPRK for decades. And these are also known anti-DPRK organizations. Now, though it's very interesting that the Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency would be there. You know, international relations is not something they do. They don't have anything to do with South-North relations. They're a regular police agency within the capital city. It's just strange that they would be listed as a partner. Exactly what could they contribute in this way? So in other words, this is a completely baseless accusation. All they've done is take people who have acknowledged that they have suffered sexual abuse, and no one's denying that. I'm sure plenty of people have suffered sexual abuse. It happens all over the world all the time. But then take that small sample size and then say this applies to the whole country. If you took my family and you polled all of us, my immediate family, oh, look at that, like 33% of the country, 33% of all Canadians are communists. Because that would be completely inaccurate, because it would be too small of a sample size. But I guess you could do it if you use their logic, and then undermine your own study by saying that it's too small of a sample size. So it's very interesting. I mean, this accusation is essentially a baseless accusation, which they even admit indirectly that they're not even following the scientific method, and then they end up saying that their own study is essentially meaningless, which makes you wonder why they would even put it out to begin with. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.